Boker Tov, good morning, and Shabbat Shalom. This morning I'm going to be joined by my colleagues, by Rabbi Foster and Cantor Rosenbaum, to share a little bit of Seder prep. Perhaps you're not ready like me, and you need looking for a little last moment inspiration. And I'll just open with a quote from a colleague and friend, Rabbi Sharon Brous from Ikar. The idea that it's possible to move from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light, from despair to hope, is the greatest Jewish story ever told. And that's what we're going to be embarking on in the next week. Shabbat HaGadol, this Shabbat, the great Shabbat, marks this moment before Pesach, before Passover. As we make our final preparations, we remove our chametz, we clean our homes, we sell our chametz, we search our homes, and we do a lot of cooking. About to embark on this incredible journey, retracing the steps of our ancestors from Egypt to Israel, from shame to praise, from sadness to joy, and make that story come alive yet again. For we are commanded not just to read about it, but to relive it, to engage with it, to learn from it, to be transformed by it, and to be recommitted with purpose, and of course, to make memories, to laugh and to sing. Whether it's by handing out boarding passes at the beginning of our Seder, framing the night as a journey, turning our Seder dining room into a life-size board game like we've done before, making a Passover Candyland, or having Seder on the floor like Yemenite Jews still do. We have so many family traditions and innovations that go back many generations, or perhaps new ones, that embrace Seder innovations that start just today. So I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleagues to start with some Seder innovations. Cantor Rosenbaum is going to first start, and then Rabbi Foster.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So I wanted to share with you some highlights from what we covered during our Sisterhood Passover experience earlier in the week. And we had a really wonderful time engaging with creative rituals surrounding Pesach. We talked a little bit about some of the items on the Seder plate. And so we have our traditional items on the Seder plate that we know. And some people have had the tradition in recent years of including other items on the Seder plate besides the traditional items we know. So some people like to include an orange on the Seder plate in honor of inclusion, both for women and LGBTQ plus people. The idea being that someone had said, this person belongs, on the bima as much as an orange belongs on the Seder plate, right? So we put the orange on the Seder plate to show that inclusion. Many people also put olives on the Seder plate in honor of peace in the Middle East, and sometimes people are doing this in honor of Ukraine as well. You might see in the handout here that some people are putting sunflower seeds in honor of Ukraine because that's their national flower. So there are a few items. As well, some people like to put coffee beans or cacao in honor of fair trade, in honor of making sure that the workforce is paid well and honored for their time and their work. So those are a few different items, but I think there is a lot of room for growth in what people put on the Seder plate. And I think what it shows us is that there's room for other items, and we find ways to make this tradition our own and to find ways to own that Seder plate and what's meaningful to us. So I would encourage you all to think about if there's an item that belongs on your Seder plate that maybe hasn't been there yet. And I also wanted to share that we talked about stories, people's family stories and traditions that they've had for many years or in recent years. And one of the special things about that was we were actually sharing Haggadot, and there are so many Haggadot out there, so many different versions from throughout the years. It's not just your traditional Maxwell House Haggadah. I think there are a lot of new ones that people have, and people were sharing them around the table. So some of the interesting ones we had, I can speak to some of mine that I have. I have actually a graphic novel Haggadah, which is really cool because it's laid out like a comic book, and it really goes through the story with all the illustrations. There were some that were really well geared towards singing and towards kids, and there were some that are geared towards comedy. The Maxwell House one actually came out with a Marvelous Mrs. Maisel Haggadah, And so that was passed around as well. And so there's elements of comedy, as well as the fact that Haggadot.com is a really useful resource for anyone looking to make their own Haggadah, which is something anyone can do if you know the story, if you can compile everything together. You have the ability to do that and really make it your own within your family, within your extended friends and relatives, anyone who is at your Seder table. You have the opportunity to engage creatively with that. So some of the Haggadot.com entries include things from your favorite TV show like Seinfeld or Schitt's Creek, or anything else that you can think of in order to engage creatively with the Haggadah. And I think people are really inspired by the opportunity to do this. So I encourage you to think more about this for this Pesach.
Thank you, Cantor. I think a lot of great ideas, ways to enliven our Seders and bring new traditions and creations. And thank you for sharing some of the new ideas to add to your Seder plate, which many around the country, around the world are adding. I wanted to take a few minutes to share about one of the traditional items on the Seder plate, perhaps my favorite, at least to eat, the charoset. And this is perhaps something we can all reflect on, and perhaps you can share at your own Seders. So I've always been struck by what charoset is supposed to be. And you may have heard, as I did growing up, that the charoset is to remind us of the mortar used by the Israelite slaves to build bricks. And yet, it's always struck me as a little odd that charoset tastes very sweet. Why is something that's supposed to reflect the bitterness of our time as slaves, the mortar that our ancestors were forced to work with, why should it taste sweet? In Ashkenazi tradition, apples and wine. In Sephardic tradition, dates and figs. And we don't often think about it, but really charoset is a paradox. How could it be that something so sweet could be a symbol reminding us of the bitterness of our time enslaved to build bricks for Pharaoh and the Egyptians? Perhaps this is the reason that a custom was developed in the Middle Ages to rectify this and include one particularly unpalatable ingredient in charoset, crushed brick. This was suggested by Rabbi Tzedakah ben Avraham of Rome in the 13th century already, and if anyone's been to Gibraltar, it's actually still the custom of the Jewish community in Gibraltar to actually add brick shavings into their charoset. And they shave off a little from the same brick at their home each year. Perhaps even the word charoset is derived from the Hebrew word cheres, brick. Now, I'm not suggesting, unless anyone's doing this already, I'm not suggesting you add brick to your own charoset. I will mention it's known that American soldiers during the Revolutionary War out at battle on Passover actually didn't have the ability to make their own charoset. They actually took a brick and put it on their Seder plate to represent the charoset. But I do want to share, there's actually a debate in the Talmud on what the reasoning is, what the symbolism is of the charoset. Psachim 116a. Rabbi Yochanan declares that the charoset is a reminder of the mortar, as we shared and as I'm sure many have heard before. But Rabbi Levi in the Talmud says it's actually to remind us of the sweetness and tartness of an apple, which is featured in the love poetry of Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which we'll read during the holiday. And the Talmud, as it often does not declare one position to be correct and one wrong, but instead it says that to satisfy both opinions, the charoset must be both sweet and tart like the apple, and be thick so that it can be spread like mortar. The paradox of being both sweet and bitter at the same time is in fact representative of the Seder as a whole, if you think about it. On the one hand, we recount having been slaves in Egypt, avadim hayinu, eating matzah, the bread of affliction, maror, bitter herbs, and yet at the same time, we are to recline and feast like kings and queens, celebrating the sweetness of freedom. So one bite of charoset is a microcosm of the Seder itself, encompassing both the bitter and the sweet, tasting the sweet fruits and nuts, delighting in luxury and freedom, but spreading it over the matzah, recreating the slave task of applying mortar to bricks. And yet the charoset, like the Seder as a whole, is not only a reminder of the bitterness of slavery and sweet feeling of freedom for our ancestors, but a reminder that while we enjoy a Zissen Pesach, a sweet Pesach, there is still bitterness in the world today, and it is incumbent upon us to work for all those suffering to make the world just a little bit sweeter. So this Wednesday evening, when you're about to take that bite into the charoset, I invite you to reflect and perhaps share a little about the charoset and that it's really much deeper than what meets the eye. So thanks.
Thank you, Cantor and Rabbi Foster. I want to make a side note. We are still available for Pesach questions. I've gotten many questions this week about koshering dishwashers, about frozen vegetables, about yogurt, and many other things. So if you have a specific Pesach question, you can field it to us offline, and we can answer them. I don't know if you know, actually, charoset is a Seder innovation. Originally, the only three things originally eaten at the first Seder and mentioned in the Bible are matzah, maror, and Pesach. The only thing that we ate on Seder night originally were matzah, bitter herb, and the Paschal lamb, right? So even charoset, which of course is so traditional, as Rabbi Foster said, comes from our Talmud, is basically 2,000 years we celebrate it. It is technically a Seder innovation. And as Cantor said, people often add different things to their Seder plate. I want to make a note, sunflower seeds for Ukraine, which is the second reading in the addendum, the readings that I've handed out, they are technically kidney oats. And if you know, right, for many years we've talked about that the conservative movement now, you can eat kidney oats. I'm not going to get into that discussion, but what I will say is, regardless of your feelings towards legumes, kidney oats, whether you eat them on Pesach or not, they don't make your home not kosher for Passover. You'll see if you shop at the Grove or anywhere else, they now have kidney oat products available. You know, it doesn't trafe up their store. So you can put sunflower seeds on your plate if you want to share solidarity with the Ukrainian people, but you don't necessarily have to eat them. Another innovation is many people are experiencing loss and feeling grief very seriously during Pesach, those empty seats at their table, those who are no longer with them. And a colleague of mine in New York at Sutton Place Synagogue, actually a rabbinic student, Benji Forrester, created a grief Seder, a Seder to happen prior. And there he made the suggestion, again, adding either to your Seder plate or to your table, something that reminds you of the person who you are remembering. So for example, at the grief Seder, someone brought a baseball glove from a parent that had passed away and put that on the table, a photo, a recipe card, Mod Podge, because their family member loved doing Mod Podge or something else. So that's another opportunity to add something to your Seder table or your Seder plate to remember someone very special. Another way, our goal on Pesach is to engage each and every one in each and every way. Many of us focus on trivia in that way. And here in our congregation is one of our trivia masters, Murray Berkowitz. You might know that every year, actually for the last 43 years, Murray has been crafting a Passover quiz. Actually, last year's version is available on our website, on our Passover resources. If you want to get this year's, you can talk to Murray and reach out to him directly, because based on extensive research, Murray's humor, including political satire, it is a fan favorite. And so I'd like to, we oftentimes use trivia at our Seder table as a way of engaging and educating and reliving. So I'm going to just take one of Murray's questions from this year's and share it with you, and you can tell me which one is the answer. Why don't we ask the hungry or needy to join us on any other Jewish festival? Right? Why just on Pesach do we invite the needy, formally invite them to celebrate with us? So these are the 5 potential answers. Number 1, because of the biblical requirement for everyone to eat matzah on Pesach, we make certain that all can do so, according to the Shibbolei Halekel. That's number 1. Number 2, if we invited them on Shavuos, we would have to worry about lactose intolerant people, gluten-free people, nightshade allergies, and nut limitations. It would cause too much of a burden on the hosts. Number 3, Birkot Hashir says that the Exodus is not just a past occurrence that happened once, but an omen of the coming redemption. Thus, since the mitzvah of charity brings us closer to redemption, we invite the hungry to come and eat with us. 4, Abu Draham states that the expenses of Pesach are so great. We all know that. We must make sure that those less fortunate can still fulfill their obligations at the Seder. And Murray notes this was from 700 years ago, before inflation. So, any correct answers there, you think? You can choose more than one. Yeah, you can choose more than one. Yeah. So, right, you probably guessed it. Everything but the lactose intolerant answer is the correct answer. Thanks, Murray. And then he adds this is his final question. Next year, what do you say at the end of the Pesach? Next year in? Yeah, he gives some other options too. Next year, watching the Guardians win the right way, he says, small ball baseball. Next year, in a world less polarized where we listen to and respect one another. Next year, without the challenges due to COVID and cancellations of trips and family events and so on. So if anyone wants to share in trivia, Murray, as well as another colleague of mine, Rabbi Robert Scheinberg, puts on his website. He's in Hoboken. Every year he does an amazing trivia contest based on, if you know the NPR show, Wait, Don't Tell Me. He does false and true, fiction or fact, and it's a great time. And this one this year, which I might share later during the holiday, is about food shortages and what you can do. So it's a great one. And as well, one of my favorite resources every year, Hadar, where I studied in New York a couple of weeks ago, puts out a Pesach reader. You can download it from their website, and the last page has a Passover Haggadah scavenger hunt, which has 18 different questions that you can search the Haggadah as you're making your way through, or someone that wants to do a little something on the side. There are 18 questions to find the way, and I'll just share with you one question, which is, how many actual blessings are recited during the Passover Seder? Anyone know? How many different blessings? Well, I don't know. How many blessings? I'd say how many blessings? Give me a good Jewish number. 18. So on the first night it is 17, but on the second night, when you bless and count the Omer, it is 18 blessings. So again, another way of engaging people. This is on Hadar's website. You can download their Passover reader, and on the last pages is this scavenger hunt. There's so many different ways to engage people during the holiday, and I hope that I'm not going to make my way through. We put together a little reader with some readings. Many of them are from the AJWS, American Jewish World Service, Haggadah, which, of course, on Passover, when we focus on freedom, we also focus on those who are not free, and a responsibility to not just think about, but to take action for the injustice in our world. It's also on our website, this reader, so whether you start with the opening reading, where different people can share about how they embodied bravery this year, how did they step into action, what lessons we'll use from the past year to fight for a more just world, to all different readings about 4 different types of children: the indifferent child, the overwhelmed child, the uninformed child, different experiences about Karpas and about Safun, hope, and a new Dayenu, a contemporary Dayenu, about how this world hasn't changed enough and how it's our way. I hope that you take those readings and so many more online to engage and to enliven your Passover Seder. I'd like to add one last one. As my colleague said, there are so many Haggadot. Every year I buy at least one new Haggadah. You might have seen the newest Haggadah this year is the Haggadah according to Shakespeare. I did not buy that one. But if you want, you can, or you can go to Haggadot.com, which Cantor referenced there. There actually is a great role-playing game for finding the Afikomen called Mission for Moses. So I recommend that. If you have anyone at your table, at your Seder table, who likes role-play games, but I picked up this one called Wellsprings of Freedom from Rabbi Ronald Agan in Canada, and I wanted to just share his reading about Karpas. And if anyone wants it, I'm happy to send you a copy after Shabbos. The karpas is a symbol of new growth and hope of spring. It's dipped in salt water to remind us of the bitterness of slavery, new blessings that can emerge from our tears. The greens are dipped in salt water to remind us of our connection to nature. Our enslavement began with an environmental catastrophe, a famine, and it ended in further assaults upon nature with the 10 plagues. Tonight, as we eat the karpas, we are mindful that just as Adam was placed in the garden to tend it and to till it, we each have a sacred obligation to be guardians of the earth. We are not free to despoil or deplete our environment. So, as Rabbi Aiken suggests, as we eat the karpas, we take a moment to ask around our Seder table, does our sacred obligation to nature enhance or limit our freedom? And what are we doing to help conserve and protect our environment this coming year? So I hope that as you begin Pesach and begin this celebration, you take a moment to find a way to engage each and every one. And I'll say in closing, of course, we are celebrating Israel's 75th birthday. And I hope that you also find a way to acknowledge that moment of Israel's incredible 75 years, the miracle of the establishment of the modern state of Israel, regardless of its challenges at the moment. What are you going to do to acknowledge that? What perhaps will you add to the Seder plate to mark that moment? What readings, what songs, and what thoughts will you ask? And these were some questions that I asked at the end of my remarks last Shabbat when I was talking about Israel. But we can ask ourselves this question. When we say L'shana Haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, what are we hoping will change in the coming year for Israel? What are we celebrating about Israel? And what about the next 75 years of Israel? How has Israel already fulfilled that mission and that pledge, L'shana Haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem? And where will we take ourselves so we can help support Israel so it has 75 and more years to come? Shabbat Shalom and Aziz and Pesach.
Shabbat Shalom.